Welcome back to presentation number 3. It is now 3:45 a.m. so it's now Wednesday morning at 3:45, and I'm here to make sure that you get the content that I promised you. All right, so this presentation, VSL webinars and other methods or modes of stealth selling. We're going to go really deep in this presentation. I'm going to give you stuff that you've probably not come across before. Some of it might be a little confusing at first, but I promise you that this is what can turn you into a great marketer. The concepts I'm sharing here are concepts I would imagine most of you have never been exposed to before, and these concepts have incredible power in turning you into a much better marketer. So let's start. We're going to start with something called distinctions. I learned this in the field of transformation. If you've ever done EST or Landmark, they talk a lot about distinctions. Distinctions they live in language, and they identify things. They give us a way of seeing the world. So let me give you a couple examples. Astronomer, right? I know nothing about the nighttime sky. If I were to look up at the sky right now and it was clear out, there'd be lots of stars, but I couldn't tell you what's the Big Dipper, Little Dipper, or Orion, or any of that stuff. I don't know it. So when I look up at the sky, all I see is stars. I don't see any constellations. I don't see any of that. However, if I were to spend a full evening with an astronomer and he or she were to point everything out to me and explain it in detail enough so that I could actually see it, then every time I look at the sky from that night forward will be different than the times before. I will now see things that I didn't see before. And think about this for a second. When you see things that you didn't see before, it allows you to do things that you've never done before. Because if you can't see it, you can't do it, right? So same with a forester, right? Like when I walk through a forest, I know nothing about trees. I know nothing about vegetation. It's not my bag, right? But if I were to spend a day walking through a forest with a forester, and he or she were to point out, that's a maple, that's an elm, here's how you can tell how old a regular maple tree is, and whatever you talk about, then anytime I walk through the forest from that day forward, I'm seeing a different forest. Because now I have a way of seeing things that's different than before. And once again, because I can see things that I didn't see before, I can do things that other people who can't see cannot do, or even I couldn't do before I saw. Okay? So, the original internet marketing gurus, I was fortunate to be one of those, right? And why were we able to become gurus so quickly? Or, how did we get there and not other people? It's because we had learned from Jay Abraham, Gary Halpert, Dan Kennedy, and what we had learned were distinctions like front end versus back end, right? Distinctions like allowable acquisition cost. So we had a way of looking at the world and internet marketing and selling online where we saw things that other people didn't see because they didn't have those distinctions. Agora's initial growth. Agora was an $8 million company, and one of the co-founders joined and immediately became a $100 million company. Well, not immediately, but very quickly became a $100 million company. And that's because Mark Ford came to Agora with distinctions that he had learned from Jay Abraham and Joel Nadell, another partner of his. And so he saw things that the people that were currently at Agora, the few people back then, did not see. And because of that, he saw opportunities to add $100 million to the business when it was an $8 million business. So some distinctions that I want to go over with you, sorry I was tangled in my cord there for a second. Some distinctions I want to go over with you in this presentation are marketing versus selling, different versus better, desires are hardwired, demand is fleeting, but beliefs connect the two. And the context is decisive. And we already started talking about context in the presentation where I went over the decoy with you. So now let's dive a little bit deeper in there, or in here rather. So I give a lot of thought to history. Every mentor I've ever had, I've always asked, where did you learn from? And then I try and trace the lineage of the knowledge. So I've asked Jay Abraham who he learned from. I asked Clayton Makepeace who he learned from. Gary Bencivenga, who he learned from, right? Mark Ford, who he learned from. And the list goes on and on. John Carlton, who he learned from. Gary Halpert, Dan Kennedy, all of the above. And believe it or not, almost all of them go to one person. And I bet you don't know who that person is, and I bet you've never heard that person's name. But if you want to know that person's name, then make sure to be on the live stream. And if you want to know that, you can ask me the question, and I'll tell you the answer. Okay, so aside from that, though, where do the biggest breakthroughs in direct response come from? And I've studied history for a while, direct response history, that is, and so I see patterns in where the biggest breakthroughs have happened, and I want to see if you see it once you start thinking about it. All right, so mistake here that I didn't correct, even though I've had a lot of time since I was in France. This is offline, this is online. I don't know why it says offline, but whatever. Okay, so let's talk about offline first. These were some of the biggest breakthroughs in direct response. And by breakthrough, I mean immediately at least 100% increase in response. Sometimes 200%, 300%. I've seen as much as 400 to 500%. That means you take the same sales message, put it in these formats, and all of a sudden, instead of making $100, you're making $500. Or instead of making $100,000, you're making $500,000. Instead of making them, you know, $100 million, you're making $500 million. Okay? Okay, so the very first breakthrough in offline direct response was personalization, the ability to actually put someone's name in the headline or in the letter. Before that, it was just, you know, it was all printed. And so, dear friend, dear neighbor, dear subscriber, whatever, right? Magalogs, right? These are sales letters that look like and feel like magazines. It makes the message seem more valuable, right? Bookalogs, books that were just sales letters printed out in book format. Editorial style advertising. If you've ever seen what appeared to be an editorial in a newspaper or magazine, but at the very top it had in small font advertisement, that's, you know, editorial style advertising. Infomercials, when they first came on the scene, crazy insane conversion rates. Long form radio, crazy insane conversion rates. The fake FedEx priority mail that you used to receive maybe about 10 years ago in the mail, big bump in response. J-mailings, for many of you probably don't know what a J-mailing is. That's where you print the sales material in some format that it looks like it was either torn out of a magazine or torn out of a newspaper. So it's a full page of a newspaper torn out, so it's a little jagged on the edges, or magazine that looks like it's torn out. And then on top of it, it said, thought you would be interested in this, and on a post-it, J. Why J? Because more first names start with the letter J than any other letter in the English language, at least. And so this was another way. We did these mailings sometimes in my hypnosis centers. Very effective. You might have received them years ago if you bought stuff, through direct mail. Okay, so all of these had crazy increasing power in direct response. In other words, same message, but put in these formats, off the charts, right? Online, when I first did the Internet Business Manifesto, that free report, it was a game changer. Back then, most people had maybe a 5-day email sequence or something like that. I was giving away something that most people told me I should have been charging for. But ultimately, it was a report that I thought was very valuable, but it had a marketing message in it. You know, it's been downloaded, that first report's been downloaded, the Internet Business Manifesto, over 2 million times, has made me a minimum of 20 million, probably a lot more than that. And once again, when it was brand new, a free report now is nothing, right? But back then it was something. When VSLs first burst on the scene, John Benson created them, and I saw it probably within a few weeks of him using it, brought it to Agora, and it helped Agora increase response rates by 300 to 400% worldwide. Nowadays, a VSL is about the same as a sales letter, but that's because people know it's a sales message. Automated webinars. When I think we were the first to create automated webinars. Can't say for sure. We didn't file a patent or anything like that. But we developed automated webinars, and back then when we first developed it, it was a huge game changer for me. I made more money during this time than any other time in my life. And the show-up rate was like 75, 80%. The drop-off rate was really low. The same webinar now might not even be profitable, but back then, game changer. The original product launch formula was a game changer, right? I saw times where an opt-in was, every opt-in was worth $100, and people were getting 30,000, 40,000 opt-ins. $3 million, $4 million campaign. Live streams. When we first did live streams back in 2007 from a seminar, and then sold the rest of the seminar on the live stream, we crushed it. When native advertising first came out, and it still is effective, but nowhere near as effective as when it first came out, and bridge pages or jump pages, the pages that take someone to a editorial style page, a blog type post, something that kind of pre-sells before the person goes to the landing page. All of these were game changers online. So what do these have in common? If you were to look at these, some are radio, some are video, some are online, some are in mail, some are hard copy, like a magalog or a bookalog, some are live streams. What do you think they all have in common? Here's a hint. What this is on this left-hand side is a very famous sales letter here at Agora. It's one that our founder, Bill Bonner, wrote, and it's very typical of what we call an indirect style sales letter, right? There's nowhere in this headline where it's screaming, "I want to sell you something," right? So it's painting a picture of this paradise, and then it's saying, "I'd like to send you a free copy of a unique and invaluable report. It's called How to Retire in Paradise at $30 a day. It tells you about the best places in the world for retirement living. In one of the places detailed in this report, gentle sea breezes keep the climate nearly perfect with mild temperature year-round." It goes on. So the hint is, it's the same reason why this indirect approach works so effectively, and it's one that Agora primarily uses, indirect approach, more so than almost anyone else. And in fact, don't know if they developed it, I don't know if Bill Bonner developed it, but certainly is a style that's different than most sales material. So here's what they have in common. All, when they were first introduced, did not scream to the prospect, "I am trying to sell you something." A change in format, right, therefore makes it something that is covert, right? It's not clear that this is a sales message. And because it wasn't clear that it was a sales message, people engaged with it for longer and engaged with it with less distrust, right? More trust. The longer that a prospect isn't sure if you are going to sell them anything, or that they don't think they're being sold, the higher the conversion rates will be, right? Because, well, I'll explain in a second why. The best, biggest, most successful newsletter launch or newsletter campaign that has ever happened was at Agora. It was called The End of America. It was in Porter Stansberry's division, Stansberry Research, and it was when when I first brought VSLs to Agora, and it combined an indirect approach. The first 30 minutes or so was talking about what was happening in the world, and there was no hint that you were being sold. Wow, that's weird. Well, okay, I'm going to come back to the point I was making there about the longer the period of time someone is not clear they're being sold, the higher the response rate. We'll get back to that in a second. But, so this is kind of a segue. If a goal seems too big, break it up into smaller sub-goals. So let's talk about my experience with automated webinars. So early on, what we discovered was that the longer the registration page, the lower the registration, the percentage that registered, but the higher the show-up rate, versus very little on the registration page, the higher the registration page, but the lower the show-up rate. So we have a problem. We want a very high registration rate and we want a high show-up rate. But how do you do that? Well, one way to do that is to break up the goals. There's no reason why we have to do both on the same page. So what we did was we created a very simple registration page. And then the very next page was like them picking the time, but also us selling them hard on what they were going to learn, the reason why they needed to learn it, what they would miss out on if they didn't, et cetera, right? So anytime that you're trying to accomplish two things or a very big goal, you can break it up into pieces, okay? One important thing to do in breaking up like how you get money in the door is breaking up marketing and selling. There's a difference. Most people can't tell you the difference. And not only can they not tell you the difference, because they can't tell you the difference, they don't have this distinction, they can't tell you the ideal time to move from marketing to selling. Do you know when you should stop marketing and start selling? There is a very specific point. I don't know if it's covered in this presentation or not, but you could ask me that on the live stream if you want. Let's go here. Okay, so I base a lot of my marketing on this concept, and it's a quote from Peter Drucker, and it says, "The goal of marketing is to make selling superfluous." And I put this in front of the Apple Store because Apple is one of the best marketing companies in the world. When has anyone ever tried to sell you an iPhone? Do you feel any pressure when you walk into an Apple Store from the sales associate being like, what's it going to take for me to get you to walk out of this with a shiny brand new iPhone 11 Pro Max? They don't do that. People walk into the Apple Store for the most part pre-sold, and they're pre-sold because their marketing is so effective. I think about selling as really being more about pushing someone out of the status quo. So we all walk around with areas of our life that we're not 100% happy about, but we're not upset enough about to take action. So right now I think I weigh about 190 pounds, 195, something like that. But I've been as heavy as 250 pounds, and I didn't like it when I was 250 pounds. I've been as thin as about 175 pounds, where at that point I'm kind of ripped. But right now I'm about 190, 195. I don't like being 190, 195. I would prefer to be ripped and 175, but I'm not upset enough about it that I won't eat some popcorn later, or, you know, do something that really I shouldn't do. But when I get to 220, which I've gotten to numerous times, I freak out, and now everything is off limits until I get back down to the weight that I want to be, because I've been moved out of the status quo. But in that case, it was the scale that moved me out of status quo. So there's lots of things that we'd like to take care of, lots of things we'd like to have, lots of things we'd like to do, but we don't move out of status quo and get those things done, or do these things, or get rid of those things. But either it intensifies, or we find an easier way to get the outcome, or someone sells us by pushing us out of status quo. Okay? One of the things, I feel like a light just went out. I don't know if that's true. I'm sorry. Maybe it's just the change of the slide and it's getting late. One of the easiest things to, one of the reasons why marketing is so much easier than selling, or at least can be for some people like myself, is that it's much easier to change someone's beliefs when they don't feel like they're being sold, right? So as soon as someone enters a sales environment, their guard is up. And I learned this from hypnosis. There's something called critical factor bypass. And so anytime you're in a learning situation, like right now, in order to learn, you can't critically analyze everything I'm saying, because if you're critically analyzing everything I'm saying, like, is that true? Do I believe that? Do I believe that? Do I have any knowledge of that not being true? If you're saying all that stuff to yourself while I'm talking, you're not learning, okay? So when you go into a learning environment, in general, you are putting aside your critical factor. The reason why hypnosis works is that it bypasses the critical factor. Someone is not consciously analyzing what you're saying. As soon as someone is in a sales situation, the critical factor is up, and now everything that's being said is being analyzed. Okay? So one of the reasons why marketing can be so effective is that you can do it in a way where you can bypass the critical factor. So that is the missing part of this presentation. I'm going to hand it off to myself over in France. So this is Rich signing off to Higher Profits and Beyond, shuffling out. Rich, take it over in France.
Determining whether that's true or not, right? So, you know, when you were in school, odds are, teacher or professor was speaking, also critical factor bypass. You're not analyzing, is this person telling me the truth? You expect that they're telling you the truth, and so you just kind of absorb it. Very different than when a salesperson is talking to you, right? So what we want to do is we want to achieve critical factor bypass, but it's almost impossible to do in a sales environment. That's one of the reasons why the indirect approach is so effective, because it allows you to open up a story and open up a bunch of stuff where it's not as clear that I'm being sold, okay? So let's take a look at a market so that you can kind of understand my perspective of a market, and then we'll start tying some of this stuff together. So, okay, so this is your market or niche. Not really, but it just represents a lot of people. But markets are defined by conflict, or at least that's how I like to define them. It's a group of people that share conflict. Conflict can be a goal unattained or a problem unresolved, but there's something that's not right in the world. And all these people have to share this thing that's not right in the world, and that's what makes up your market. So a market is defined by its conflict. Now, odds are that for the majority of prospects, in the stuff especially that we sell, that they've been struggling with whatever conflict they have for a while. They didn't just wake up yesterday and recognize that, oh, I've got this problem, or I have this goal that I haven't been able to attain. So they've been struggling with it for a while, and if they're still in the market, then we also know that they haven't gotten the result. Because if they got the result, they'd no longer be in the market. If the conflict was solved, you know, there wouldn't be any reason to still be an active prospect in that market. So one of the things that we have to think about is, why is this going to work when nothing else I've tried has worked, right? If the person's been in the market for some period of time, odds are that they've tried to solve the conflict, but they haven't. They still want to solve the conflict, or they wouldn't be in the market, but they also have less trust, and they're more distrustful, really, about. And they also can personalize some of it towards themselves, right? There's something wrong with them. They can't get the result, right? So, as it relates to that, if you kind of can imagine yourself, and I'm sure that each and every one of us has areas of our life that we wish were different, but we're not necessarily sure what the best way to get the conflict resolved is. But one thing that we can say is that when it comes to things like this that we're talking about, that different is better than better, right? Because better is subjective and it's hard to tell until you've bought the product. But if I haven't gotten the result from the way that the market has kind of, the things I've been offered in the market so far, I haven't gotten the outcome, then actually something different is really, will make it more possible that maybe I'll get this out, right? And so I have a slide a little bit later that references breakthrough advertising, Gene Schwartz, but this is different is better than better is you can read that into Gene Schwartz, because when he's talking about the third level where you have to introduce a new mechanism, what he's basically saying is give people a new reason to believe in the outcome. That's what a new mechanism is, right? Some way to get that outcome that they haven't heard about before. So if you're not different, you're visible, right? And this is my favorite slide. What's different gets attention, right? Like, so this is a bathroom, obviously a men's bathroom, and it's different. I've never seen another bathroom like this, but it's almost impossible not to remember this bathroom once you've walked in it, and it's almost impossible not to share it with other people when you go back to the table in the restaurant and tell your friends about what you just saw in the bathroom. So it's different, and so what's different not only can have the possibility of getting the conflict finally resolved, it not only gets attention, but it therefore also generates hope, right? People are in search of hope to finally get the conflict resolved, right? In health, they have some secret hope that life can be better, financial, life can be better, obviously for different reasons, but there's some hope underlying all of this. Now, this is a little bit out of sequence, but I didn't really know where to put it. This, I think, is one of the hardest obstacles to get over when you're dealing with prospects that have seen a lot, tried a lot, etc. Generally what happens is that one of two things: either they think there's a problem with them, or they start screening out more and more things that they don't believe apply to them because of whatever beliefs they have about themselves. So I've built a couple of $10 million businesses, but that's about it. They've all topped out at $10 million, right? I've grown them very fast, but that's where they generally plateau. Now, Mark's grown a couple of businesses to 100 million, Bill's grown a business to $1 billion. If either one of them told me that my company, my $10 million company, could be a $100 million company, I have a whole bunch of reasons in my head that apply to me, right, as to why I couldn't have a $100 million company. Right, I'm flaky, I don't return calls on time, when I think an employee's stupid, I don't have any time for them, I'm a bad leader, I've got a whole long list of why I can't have it. Which means that, but I still have a hope maybe. Not really, but I still, let's say I did, I have hope of a $100 million business. Well, I can still be convinced, right, that it's possible for me, but I have to, the way that would need to be done is, my issues would have to be addressed. Like, you think you're a bad leader and manager because when people are dumb, you don't have time for them, and that's a really bad way to be a boss. But in fact, when you have a $100 million business, you have to take that attitude because, so start portraying all the things that I think are bad as good, right? And I've done this in some of my, webinars actually, where I'll take all the bad habits that my prospect thinks are standing in their way and show them the positive intent, not call it positive intent, but show them the positive intent and show them that this is a core characteristic of success, it's just misapplied. Right, so if you have information overload and you're constantly buying stuff, it means that you take responsibility for your own education and you will pursue that to all ends necessary, right? To be successful, you have to do that. So that's taking the negative and turning it into a positive. And so it's about getting someone to see that this does apply to me, right? Now, one of the easiest ways that I found to get people to feel like it applies to them is basically to use my personal experiences and put it back on them, right? There's a very famous quote, although I have no idea who said it because it's been attributed to a bunch of people, but the quote is, "That which is most personal is most general." And I love that quote because I believe it to be very true. I've kept a journal for 30 years, and I write my journal every day, and I'm writing about how I feel and the experiences I've had. And the things that I'm most reluctant to share, the things that I'm most insecure to share, are the things that most people are struggling with too, that they don't share either. So when I've written, like, when I write my reports or I'm creating a webinar, I'm really talking to myself when I was feeling that way, right? I don't really say that I'm talking to myself, I'm talking to them, but I can talk about it in a much more visceral way, right? Most people feel misunderstood. And one of the most common things, like Dan Kennedy used to have this big sign in the back of his seminars, And the sign said, "My business is different," because that's the number one answer that anyone in the seminar would respond when they got advice, because we all think our situations are different, we're unique, we're misunderstood, no one really gets us, right? So when you come in and they feel understood by you, it's extremely powerful, right? So that which is most personal is most general, and this relates to problems, the implications of those problems, the struggles, the self-doubts, the failed attempts, feeling isolated. More and more people are feeling isolated today. But you can't say like feeling isolated, because that's generic, right? There's this thing in novel writing or any kind of fiction writing, show, don't tell, right? So it's one thing to say that you might have self-doubt or you might have this. It's another thing to really talk about what that looks like, feels like, and what the experience of it is, okay? So we're talking about, just to kind of sum up where we are right now. The biggest breakthroughs come when we have some amount of time, really, to get a message across where it's not obvious that we're trying to sell. And one of the ways that I wanted to break this up to talk about it was breaking it up into marketing and selling, because that becomes an easier way to do it. Because when we break it up into marketing and selling, it becomes a lot easier to change beliefs, because we don't have that same resistance that you're trying to sell me right now. So we'll return to those concepts in a second, but this is a concept, I don't know how true it is, but it's just a good way of looking at a market. It was created by a guy by the name of Chet Holmes, that passed away a few years ago. And he said in every marketplace, there's a pyramid of where the buyers are, or where the prospects are. And in general, 3% are open to buying right now, like they're in market. 6 to 7% are open to buying now, but they still need a little bit of a nudge push. That's where the funnel comes into place. 30% are not thinking about it, 30% don't think they're interested, and 30% know they're not interested. Okay? So, when I thought about marketing, and we were talking about it a little bit earlier, like as far as that, Agora Financial has great media buyers, Legacy has a great overall marketer, but worse media buyers, there's really, at the end of the day, if we hold out Drucker's thing, the goal is to make selling superfluous. There's really kind of two roads to make the selling superfluous. On the one hand, we can chase the current demand, and that would be media buying and going all the places where we know our prospects to currently be. And the other is to create demand, which is nurturing people up that funnel, right? And they're both necessary. I'm not trying to make the claim that one's bad, one's good, or one's good, one's bad. They're just that most people spend very little time on the demand creating side, they spend most of their time on the demand chasing side. Because of what I sold, there wasn't any demand for what I sold. I was kind of forced to go down the other road. And luckily succeeded and then learned a lot of things. So demand chasing is just kind of focusing on the top of the pyramid. Demand creating is focusing on the whole pyramid and trying to move the people at the bottom up and still selling to the people on the top. If we're doing demand chasing, then we're looking for lots of pyramids where we can find the tops, right? This is and a good media buyer, that's what they do. They find where our prospects are all over the internet, and they're focused on them. When we're doing demand creation, we're moving people up the pyramid. We're getting people to consider different ways of looking at their issues and problems. All right. So this is breakthrough advertising, and I think this is early on in the book. It might be on like the first or second or third page. It says, people don't change, only the direction of their desires do. All that's necessary is to be able to channel those desires into products that satisfy them. So this book is not about building better mousetraps. It is, however, about building larger mice and then building terrifying fear of them and your customers. In other words, it's about helping to shape the largest and strongest market possible, and then intensifying that market's reaction to a patient need or problem and to the exclusive solution you have to offer. Now, one of the things that makes this book so wonderful, aside from how the insights that Gene had, he had to do all of this in an ad. Like, me reading it 30 years later, or however long, having the internet, I realized I could break this up. I could do what he's talking about before I ever introduced the sales team. So, based on what we just learned from Gene Schwartz, it's impossible to create desires, and our desires never change. So to create demand, we have to isolate the desires that our prospects already have and focus them towards our solution, right? And the way that's done is really with belief. What connects desire to demand is belief. There's only, when I did a lot of research on desire, there's only one scientifically validated research up and down and highly referenced study on desires. It was by this guy, Professor Stephen Rees, a very well-known American psychologist, who also developed a personality profile based on whether your desires were stronger than usual or less than usual in 16 different desires. So to just give you an example, right? The first two are power and independence, right? So power is the desire to influence others, independence is the desire for self-reliance. There are 16 in his thing, and he's written a couple books. He passed away a year and a half ago. So power, if you have a strong, right, so all these desires are kind of bell curve, and most people fall in average in all these desires. But you'll have a few of your desires that are either stronger or less than normal. And you'll be on one side or the other side of the bell curve. Well, if you have a strong desire for power, then you also have a strong desire to lead, influence, and take responsibility. But if you have a weaker than average desire for power, then you're uncomfortable leading, you're uncomfortable influencing, and you're much more comfortable following, right? Just your natural way of doing it. And those things don't change. If you have a strong desire for independence, you desire to be free, autonomy, self-sufficient, you really dislike being dependent on others. If you have a weak desire for independence, then you have a stronger desire to bond with others, to be a part of a community, to be able to easily rely on others. So it really shapes our personality, and the reason I'm bringing up desires is, well, if desires are where all demand emanates from, it would seem to make sense to understand desires a little bit better, and so I studied all the books I could get my hands on from this Stephen Rees, and what I was showing you with bell curve is the personality test that he created called the Rees Motivation Index, RMI, motivational index. Okay, so this is how I see demand, right? This is how I see demand gets created, right? And I base this on my experience, and then also a couple things that happened that I will share with you right now. So someone might have a desire, let's say, for power, right? That's one of the core desires. Now they have a belief about what that power will do for them, right? How best to achieve that power. They'll have a bunch of beliefs about power, right? So the core desire is power, right? Now, there's a lot of ways that you could get power. It depends on what your beliefs are. You might think that being a executive in a big Fortune 500 company is power. If you're a guy, you might think being able to fight well is power. Being really strong is power. Being a policeman is power. You could, everyone might be different, but we all have these beliefs about what will deliver our power, right? So then from there, we have a desire then for something related to that, right? So if we believe that being executive of a Fortune 500 company is real power, then we have a strong desire, right, to have that. And then we have a belief about what's going to be required to get it, and from there comes demand. So when I first wrote this first report I wrote, the Internet Business Manifesto, it did better than I expected. But I also had a few friends in a few other niches that asked if they could kind of be inspired by it. And I said, okay. And I didn't realize at the time that inspired by it meant copy it verbatim and just change the niche. But they did, and it worked. So it worked in two other niches. It worked in Forex, and that I know of, and real estate investing. And if you think about, so I was talking to people who wanted to make money online. Someone took my report and just changed the terms so that it wasn't about marketing online, it was about investing in real estate. And then one was investing in Forex. And they all worked. But if you think about it, all three of those are about making more money. I imagine based on what they are, that they also have an element of autonomy. You know, the majority of people, if they want to make more money, the majority of people just try and get a better job, right? Or try and work extra hours, or you know, something like that. They don't start a business, right? Or they don't start studying online business or forex trading or real estate investing. So it's a certain segment of the population that must have certain desires and certain beliefs. And so my thought at the time is that this was probably the same, like maybe it was, you know, freedom and financial security or something like that. The core belief was, you know, for me, it was online. For someone else, it was real estate. For someone else, it was the stock market, right? So now they have a desire to make their money online and fulfill their dreams, or make their money in real estate to fulfill their dreams, right? Now they have certain supporting beliefs about how they'll get there, right? So online, when I first started, it was about learning more marketing tactics. The right marketing tactics is going to solve everything. For, you know, real estate, I don't know, it might be finding the best deals. Money's made on the buy, right? So there are beliefs that we have related to the outcome that we want that then determine what we're going to buy. So if we believe that the right internet marketing product is going to be what we need, right, then that's what we're going to be out in the market buying, right? So when I think about marketing and all the stuff that I've kind of mentioned already, what we're really trying to do is move prospects to the ideal buying mindset in marketing, right? Well, before they ever see a sales message, if possible, that we move them into the right mindset. So I've never bought anything on how to pick up women, right? Not because I'm a smooth operator, but just because I got lucky and had a wonderful, like, I just, you know, I got lucky, right? But I also had some reservations about buying it. Even, like, if I was considering it, I had some preconceived notions that might prevent me from buying it, like only losers buy stuff like that. Like, you have to be a weird guy to buy stuff like that. Now, I don't necessarily believe that's true, but I believe that if I bought it, it would be like that, right? So if someone's going to try and market to me that kind of product, then they got to deal with that, right? They got to let me off the hook for buying it and make me feel okay about it. So that's going to be, like I said, much more easily done outside the salesman, like message. It could be, right, that the guru who sells that could be talking about how they learned from their father or their older brother, and a lot of guys grow up without their father really around because of teaching this stuff, and you never had someone teach it. It's very hard to get it, like, just by yourself, and start to lay the foundation of why I'm not a loser if I buy this, right? Why there's a really good reason, actually, I don't know this. So when we think about moving someone from the current mindset, the mindset they currently have, the ideal mindset, it's probably stuff that they need to know, believe, or feel, right? Think, feel, believe. And what we're trying to do is, one, identify where they currently are and where we need to take them, right? And so just to give you some examples of what I mean, like micro level, right? So in the beginning of that first report I wrote, there was this section, this was just a slide in that section, talking about how every industry evolves over time. That it's a Wild West days, like in the beginning, but quickly over time, the real business owners like push out the entrepreneurs that are kind of freewheeling and never build a business, right? And so I talked about how, you know, in the newspaper industry, there was like 150 newspapers in New York City at one point, like in the early days. In the cable TV industry, there were tons of cable TV companies. In the auto industry, there were hundreds of automobile companies in the early days. In the infomercial business, there were tons of infomercial companies, right? But then over time, infomercials got more expensive, the airtime got more expensive, the ranker like changed the game, and then all of a sudden, it wasn't so easy for a person to just do it. John Carlton, a famous copywriter, talks about the infomercial business when he first got into it, and the time was free. You just had to show up like at the studio with the videotape because they had nothing to play, right? So at that time, it was like, you know, the way Google AdWords was when you could buy all the clicks you wanted for 5 cents, right? So I was making the case that all industries evolve, and right now you're online, or you should be online, but today is the easiest day to grow your business. Tomorrow will be more difficult, the following day it will be more difficult, because every industry is like that, and you've been very lucky, right? The whole goal of that whole piece of content is to move someone who might be in the current mindset of someday I will start making real money online to I better do it now, because it's only going to get more difficult in the future, right? So creating some desire, some urgency, not desire, some urgency in the way they're looking at life, right? Now, also, if I'm selling business coaching, I really don't want, if their current mindset is they're super confident or they're hopeless, neither one of those is really great for me, right? If they're super confident, they don't need my help. If it's hopeless, I can't help. So really what I want is I don't want them to be confident or hopeless. I want them to be somewhere in between, but they're confident if they get my help, right? So we can start to construct, what is the ideal prospect? What would be the layout? What would be the easiest person to sell? What would they have to think, feel, and believe? Because we can create that market. So this was also, this was the big takeaway of the first report, right? To move people who weren't succeeding and didn't know why, or were overwhelmed and frustrated and didn't know why, to getting them to see that they were behaving like an opportunity seeker and that they needed to become an entrepreneur. So that is the idea of moving someone from a current to ideal mindset. Now, one of the easiest ways to kind of get your head around it is to look at it like this, right? So whatever current behavior the prospect is currently doing is based on some current belief, right? So if you want to know what your prospects believe, just look at what they're doing. What we need to do is we need to move to certain desired beliefs so that we can get the desired behavior. So marketing exists in moving people from here to here, right? That's the primary task of marketing. And like I said, if you're not really sure, you can just look at what their current behavior is. So years and years and years ago, I wrote this report for my clients, and it's kind of similar to, it's the marketing equivalent of the big idea, or the marketing equivalent of the USP. In the USP, at least my understanding of it, is, it's the single reason why someone should do business with you over all others, right? So what occurred to me a long time ago, as I saw the internet getting more fractured and people's attention being so scarce, is that the likelihood that all my marketing messages were going to be consumed was not high. They weren't going to read all my emails. They weren't going to read all the material I put out, watch all the videos I put out. And so I figured that if I could figure out what the one belief is that I need my prospects to believe, that if they believed it, they would buy, then I would make that the theme of all my marketing. And my marketing message would keep going in and out of that message. I'd figure out 50 different ways to say the same thing, and each email, each webinar, each report would all support that theme, that core concept. And so I call it the core concept. It's about a 30-page report, and I walk people through how to figure out what that one idea is that will move the most amount of prospects to buying once they have it in place. And we'll get everyone a copy of that. We'll just be included in the slides. Core concept, the way I defined it, was if it's accepted, buying your product becomes the next logical and emotional step. Right? It creates demand for your big promise. It achieves critical factor bypass because you're weaving through, and it's subtle. It gets stronger over time by fractionalization. That's another hypnosis term. When we want to take someone into a deeper state of hypnosis, we hypnotize, unhypnotize, hypnotize, unhypnotize, not unhypnotize, but take them out, bring back in. And each time getting stronger and stronger. And it's the same, it's like that famous Winston Churchill quote, if you have a point to make, hit it with a hammer, sledgehammer over and over again. It's the same thing. It's like we have this one idea that we know if our prospects believe this one idea, they're going to buy our product. That is what we're going to keep hitting over and over again, and it creates an epiphany, ideally, a realization, an aha, right? And along those lines, because I don't think I have it in here, but what I try to do, and this was a conversation that Mark and I had years and years ago, but it always stuck with me. Ideally, you want a prospect to have a revelation, an aha, like all of a sudden the skies part, the angels sing, and they recognize why they haven't been successful in the past and why they can be successful now. but you want them to have a revelation. So what I always try to do is go for the revelation, then give them the explanation before I move on. So if they don't have the revelation that I want them to have, I've still explained it, but if I can get them to think it before I say it, then when I say it, I've just confirmed their beliefs, which makes it even that much more true. Okay, so when I thought more and more about the core concept, what I realized was that I wasn't negating what their current belief was, I was just making it incomplete, which is the best news you'll ever hear if you're not getting the outcome that you want, right? So their current belief is here, and they're just missing one thing. They're looking at it wrong, or there's something off, right? And that's the best news, because there's some reason why they're not getting what they want, and the best reason is that they're just slightly off. They're missing one thing. That's the whole, like, this isn't about the secret, but the whole reason the secret works is because the alternative is much harder to digest. I'd much rather believe that the reason I'm not successful is because I don't listen to the secret than actually I'm lazy and dumb and all these kinds of things. Okay, so a little bit of my backstory as it relates to what we're talking about. In 2006, right, I had just wrapped up the coaching program. I didn't really have anyone to coach, and I actually had a project that I was doing with Will Bonner at Early to Rise in 3 months. And I didn't know what I was going to do over the next 3 months to make money. And so I wanted to get some extra clients. But there was no one in internet marketing at that time that really wanted business coaching, because they didn't see the application. They didn't see how knowing more about business would help them make more money online. So at that time, they were thinking, I don't want a business, I just want to make money. Marketing will make me rich. I need to learn more marketing tactics. I can get financially free with internet marketing. And so that, like, people were selling, like, search engine loopholes, like, all kinds of crap, basically, that most of the buyers had no business, but, this is what they were building. So I wrote this report, the Internet Business Manifesto, and then once went out, and released it on my blog, and it was 30 pages, and it was, there were a lot of things in that report, but part of it was, and this is a good way to think about it, one of the ways I like to talk to clients about it, I really believe in business coaching. I still believe in business coaching. I think most people have really some wacky ideas about business. And so I didn't believe that prospects needed it because I was selling it. I believed prospects needed it, which is why I was selling it, right? But my prospects didn't think that. So one of the reasons why I believe it and they don't is because I've had certain experiences that have led me to that conclusion. They have, right? And since they haven't had those experiences, they therefore don't have those beliefs, and therefore they don't see the need. So part of this report was, can I give someone an accelerated experience of my experiences? Can I, obviously I can't put them in the situation, but can I do it abbreviated? Can I do it accelerated, where they start coming to the same realizations that I've come to? So the current belief was the right marketing tactic, secret, or online business opportunity will make you rich. That's how I simplified it, right? The core concept that I came up with is, yes, it's true, you must know marketing to succeed online, but you also must know other critical business areas too. Marketing might be the most important, it is the most important of business, but it's not the only thing you need to know about business, right? And then I defined it as a label by kind of creating a disease called opportunity seeking. So it's a very powerful process that I experienced myself when I was diagnosed with ADD. So I got royally screwed in the business deal, altered my personality. I was always kind of low-key, didn't lose my temper. And then all of a sudden, I was not low-key, and I was losing my temper left and right after getting screwed in this business deal. So I had a lot of rage that I couldn't just, get out. So I went and saw a psychologist 3 times a week for 6 months, and then finally, I got that rage out. But the psychologist said on the way out, hey, you might have ADD, you might want to check that out. It's not my specialty, but you might want to check that out. And I thought that was ridiculous, because I've always been hyper-focused. Turns out, though, that that's actually a sign of ADD. So I didn't think anything of it, but then I was in a bookstore, and I came across this book, Driven to Distraction. And Driven to Distraction, one of the first books on ADD, and they talk about all the problems that you experience with ADD. Symptoms, we could say symptoms, but they're really problems that they've redefined as symptoms of ADD. Right? So all the problems that I had in my life that I didn't like about myself, whether it was flaky, procrastinated, all these kinds of things, I was reading this book, are all caused by ADD. So in that moment, I was let off the hook for all of it. Like, there was now a reason why I hadn't solved any of these, because I struggle with ADD, right? And there's the inherent belief that now I know something about the problem that I didn't know before, I'll be able to solve it, right? Now, if I just solve the ADD, I'll get rid of all these 20 things I dislike about myself, right? So there was tremendous, like, enthusiasm and excitement on my part because I had found the answer to, like, not just one problem, but, like, lots of problems, right? I'm trying to do the same thing here, right? I'm taking the things that my prospects would define as problems, and I'm redefining those as symptoms of being an opportunity seeker, of just focusing on marketing, of not knowing business, etc. Right? So once again, it's like I'm taking all their problems that they think are unrelated and showing them how they can get rid of all of them in one fell swoop. So the course or the program that this report eventually sold was BGS, which is a business coaching program that transforms opportunity seekers into strategic entrepreneurs. Right? It's the only one that does that because I'm the only one who said it does it. No one else has ever claimed that, and that's not something that people are looking for unless they've read that. But if they've read that, that's exactly it. So this was after the manifesto, right? Like the goal was to get people to believe this. They need to become a strategic entrepreneur, that not knowing business strategy is killing them. And I made fun of it. Like in the report, in the manifesto, I talk about like how most people's strategy is just more doing the same thing as everyone else, but doing more of it, and how idiotic of a strategy that is. Learning more marketing tactics is the problem, not the solution, and I can't get financially free. I can get financially free with an online business, right? All right, so after I released that report, this one report, 30 pages, brought in $3.5 million in a matter of weeks. Like this was, I didn't have a list. I didn't like this all came like fast, right? $7.5 million the first 12 months. I went from being unknown in the market to being the most known at that time. My list grew. People wanted to mail for me, et cetera, right? So I then did the deal that I was supposed to do with Will, and then I came back and started writing more reports because I never had anything work so well, right? So I wrote, that's the first one, the manifesto. I wrote the business chapter, the final chapter, intention document 1, 2, the David manifesto, and then one last report. A lot of my reports I recognized they're about the prospect, but they're about also what's going on in the world, changing the way they perceive the context. Because if you can change the way someone looks at the world, it's very easy to change behavior. So, this report was all about moving from an opportunity seeker to a strategic entrepreneur. Most people are making the mistake of being an opportunity seeker, and that's why they're struggling. This was all about most people get started in the wrong business. It's not the right business for them. And I talk about how the two most important decisions you're going to make in your life are what business to start and who you marry. And you don't, when it's time to get married, or you want to get married, you don't go to a bar and find the most desperate person and propose. So why would you go to the most desperate market and just offer what it seems like they need when you might not be the best person to offer it? And you might not want those customers, right? The final chapter was about the front end and back end and what I learned from Agora. Then the 10-page document 1 was that pension was going to become the most scarcest thing, and so this is about what's happening in the world, and then you as the prospect, how you have to prepare for the change, right? So it's different than you're flawed, or you have a problem, but this is going on in the world that might be causing these problems for you. Here's how to win over it. This was talking about how most of the attention now is going to social media. This is pre-Facebook, where Facebook just started. And so I was talking about the rise of authorities and why people would want authorities and too much choices and how attention translates directly to money. And then the David manifesto I wrote with Jay Abraham about the need for authority, and then we created a course on how to be an authority. So I played around. I didn't really, it took me years to figure out what I did the first time by accident to be able to do it intentionally. And so I experimented with a lot of things. Like, for example, this was the worst performing report that we ever had. And it was the worst performing report that we ever had, I believe, because it had the sales letter in the back. So all the other reports, these were all given away free, and then the prospect was invited back to my blog to write about what they experienced. And they would find links there, and also I mentioned in the report that I'm doing one last coaching program. Most people won't be able to afford it, it'll probably be too expensive for them, but I wanted to leave this so that at least people who couldn't afford working with me would at least have that. So here, even though there was a sales letter, it just wasn't attached. This got passed along a lot. People shared it all over the place. And no one felt like everything they had read was just a setup for the sale. I think that's what happened here. And a lot of customers told me that they didn't. Oh, gasp. A lot of people told me they didn't pass it along because they were embarrassed by the sales letter in the back, to send it to friends or stuff like that. So I played around with a lot of these things. What I found out was that the first report and the last report I wrote, well, not what I found out. The first report and the last report I wrote were the ones that did the best. And they both centered around problems, not what was going on in the world, the opportunity, or anything like that. It was much more problem focused and the way out. So the second one I did, or the last one I did, which made me feel like, okay, I got this, was to market a program teaching the theory of constraints. Now, no one in my market wanted theory of constraints. They didn't even know what that was. It's from manufacturing. Like, how does that apply to the internet market? But in this report, I made the case that most people make the mistake of equating their potential with success, but no one would admit that they're at their full potential now. But every time you buy another product or another thing, you're only adding more potential. And more potential doesn't translate into more success. There's already something stopping you from tapping into your full potential. The best way to get the most success with the least amount of work is to figure out what is currently standing in your way of tapping into your full potential. And figure that out, and you'll have the biggest leap and also be able to capitalize on a lot of the potential you've gathered over the years that you haven't been able to translate. And the best way to do that is with theory of constraints, which identifies the one core constraint. Right? So GPS, which was the name of the program, is the only program that shows entrepreneurs how to identify and eliminate their current constraints. And the big idea, or core concept, the biggest cause of failure is repeatedly building more potential instead of eliminating the constraints that are currently blocking you from having full potential. Right? And the core concept was, it's not your potential that determines your success. Well, the current belief was, as long as I keep improving myself and adding more potential, I will continue to achieve better and better results. And what I wanted them to believe is that it's not your potential that determines your success, it's your constraint that is currently stopping you from having your full potential. And if I got them to believe that, then it's a slam dunk. Like, then they need to buy the product that's going to show them what their constraint is. Okay? So a lot of these concepts will transfer over as we talk about webinars, but I wanted to tell you about how I saw marketing and how these reports related. So my reports, the way I looked at them always were completely marketing. I had a couple of goals when I released it. The first one was to get the police changed so that I could sell the thing. The next one was whether they bought or not, that they felt like they got value, so they'd be willing to read the next one. And that they felt smarter and better having read it, and therefore more likely to share it. And so there are concepts that are related to that, about getting them to share it, that we'll cover in the section on webinars. Okay? So that was like 2006 and 2008 I wrote those reports, but back to what we were talking about in the beginning about the difference between selling and marketing, every time I released a report and created a big fanfare, tons of sales, tons of money coming in. Every time that a new report, like after the report got old, it still worked for us, but the sales were less and less and less. I attribute that to there wasn't anything pushing them that final step. They read a report, they had good ideas, like I know how to lose weight, but there was no incentive right now to take care of it. And so the guy that was running my business at the time, after I wrote the entrepreneurial emergency and I knew I had figured out like how to make it work, I told them that's the last report I'm writing. If the business goes out of business, then that's fine. Then I'll write a report and I'll keep all the money, because I was making less and less money with each report because the team was getting bigger and I was supporting more people just by writing these reports. So we didn't really do anything for 7 months except try to figure out a different model, and that's when we came up with automated webinars. And so I wrote this report, and this is still the way most people market automated webinars online. The systems that most people use, like Evergreen webinars or Webinar Jam, are based on my software, our internal software. Yeah, okay. So you'll also get a copy of this report. This was 48 pages, and this was me telling people, at the time, nobody was doing automated webinars, me telling people that automated webinars were the future. And I do have an email of someone telling me they wanted a refund because they didn't sign up for stuff like this. And a year later, I was like, Anyway, in the report, this is how it breaks down. And there's this chart is in the report as well. And it's basically, this is the invitation sequence, right? This is after they've registered. So this is what we call an indoctrination sequence. I'll explain what that means. This is the actual webinar. Did they show up or not? And then the different segments based on whether they stayed the whole time or not. Did they buy or not, etc. Okay. So let's now just talk about webinars a little bit. Okay. And at 3 we want to 3:15. Okay. So, so evergreen event-driven marketing is this idea of having an event, but making it evergreen, right? So that it's constantly working. Now, this was like the biggest game changer in our business. We went from struggling to sell one back end a day because we really had no front ends, because I was never a great copywriter, to all of a sudden selling between 8 and 12 of our back ends every day. So like, 30 to 40 grand every day just on autopilot coming in. Just from affiliates sending traffic, from getting cold traffic. We actually had a descension model as opposed to an ascension model. So we started with the most expensive and worked our way down. Primarily because it was much easier for me personally to sell through education than to sell through copy. So this is how the the whole process works. Pre-event, there's an invitation sequence, right? Like you're going out to the list, or your affiliates are mailing, or you're doing advertising, or whatever. Once they opt in, there's an intensification sequence. The intensification sequence is to build excitement, to create bonding with whoever the guru is, to associate the name with the voice, with the face, so that when they show up on the webinar, they have a visual image of who they are talking to, who's talking to them, etc. Then there's the event with the behavior tracking, and then there's the post-event where each segment is going to be marketed to separately based on the actions that they took. Okay? So the invitation sequence is pretty straightforward, but, and maybe this might be a little less today, I guess it depends on where you are, but at the time, if you're inviting someone to a webinar and you're sharing great content, it's a lot different than trying to send someone to a sales letter, right? So it positions you as really being your prospect's champion, as being an authority, as being like a go-to person, not just a sleazy salesperson, right? And positions you as a thought leader. And when you're done with the invitation sequence, you really only have 2 groups of prospects. You have people who registered, people who didn't. Okay, and we'll return back to that. Okay, the intensification sequence starts immediately after they've opted in or registered for the webinar. And the goal is to motivate everyone who registered to actually show up, to bond with everyone, right? So that's why you want to use some live video. Not necessarily live like live streaming, but live face on video.
Do you have statistics on like who generally attend? And can you make it vary? Like we have a few webinars and we constantly see a sort of 30-35% show up related to the original number of registered people?
Yeah. I'm going to tell.
Oh, you're going to talk about it?
I'm going to talk about that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But you can sell anything. I mean, like I did a project for Rick Kurzweil. I don't know if you know who Rick Kurzweil is, but he had a doctor. Rick Kurzweil is the guy who's the head of AI for Google, and before that he was an MIT professor who invented the synthesizer, the optical character recognition, and a bunch of other things. And he's the guy that also believes in singularity. And his dad died early, and he takes 150 vitamins a day until there's the singularity, and then we can all live forever. But anyway, he had a doctor that he was his doctor, and they wanted to do a webinar, and they wanted I consulted them on it, and that was selling a $25,000 package where you go to the doctor's office to cold traffic. You know, I mean, they knew who Rick Kurzweil was, and did really well. So you could sell really anything with this stuff. But debt prospects either excited, and most events are seriously lacking intensification. And so they pay a price for it, just in lower conversion rates. The goal is to get people so excited about showing up that trying to get them to show up is less of an issue, but it's always an issue. Okay, during the event, you're delivering valuable content, setting up, the purchase of your product, maybe adjusting some buying criteria. Once again, if you handle it right, it intensifies your position as a thought leader. If you do a good job and you actually deliver value, you get them to show up more. And when you're done with the event, like the actual webinar, you have these 5 groups. You have prospects who didn't register, you have prospects who registered but didn't show up, you have prospects who registered, attended but failed early, you have prospects who registered, attended but didn't buy, and then you have prospects who purchased and are now clients. So we can kind of cross this off, like as far as our marketing goes. We obviously want welcome messages and stuff like that. Let me go over the rest of this, and then we'll get into some tactical stuff. The post-event process, we're going to now have separate campaigns for these 5 different segments. So for prospects who didn't register, and for people who didn't register, who registered but didn't attend, what we used to do in the past was send them lots of replay offers, and when we did it again, and what we found was we could do that 3 times before they would opt out. Like, whether they had registered or whether they hadn't. But either way, hadn't seen it. And so we came up with a really clever way to double our sales by dealing with those people in a different way. People who registered, attended, but failed early. We're going to have one campaign. Back then, we would go to a page. They didn't have automatic pickup, so we gave them the slider, come back, so they could control the webinar. It was less than ideal, but that was the only thing we had at the time. People who registered, attended, but didn't buy. We felt like those people just had questions that they needed answered. We could use deadlines. We could use bonus stacking. There's a bunch of things we could do with those people. There was a whole sales sequence after, and we could actually get more sales in the follow-up than we did live. And then prospect reports are now live. And the goal for each segment is the same. We're just trying to move them closer to the purchase, whatever that means. Okay. So here are some tactics, but then I want to dive deep. Okay, nowadays, like, they're automated, where you can just kind of finish the time, like they're coming from Facebook. This is what best practice is today. You want to start every hour, not every 30 or 15 minutes. You want people to have some investment in showing up, not just like, oh yeah, sure, I'll check it out for 2 minutes, because then they'll just stay for 2 minutes.
I'm confused.
Yes.
What is an automated webinar as what we did, we've been doing in Switzerland is webinars that actually pretend to be live, but are not. And we sort of tell people, okay, we're going to go live Tuesday at 8:30 p.m. Don't miss it. And then they show up, but they don't show up. And then the next day, if they haven't attended, then we just send them the replay.
Okay, so it's very similar. Yeah, an automated webinar is like that, except that it's more automated than that. It is creating a new timetable for each person that comes based on when they got there.
But you need the software to do that. Or?
Yeah, we built it, but nowadays, like, there's tons of software out there that do that. Webinar Jam does that.
We have Webinar Jam.
Well, Webinar Jam does that.
I don't think it does.
Yeah, you can set it so that it plays every 20 minutes, every hour, like all those things. And we can take a look at it for you later as well. So start every hour, push the viewer to desktop if at all possible, tell them the video notes, that they better on the big screen. Copy on landing pages, I'll explain that in a second. But lots of video and copy on the thank you page. So little on the registration page, lots on the thank you page, I'll explain why. Use clips from the webinar as ads in retargeting to get people to show up. That's a game changer for show up. So a couple of video ads where the guru, whoever is the person who's the focal point of the webinar, is talking to the people who have already registered, how excited they are for them to show up, and I've got this great stuff planned, and I can't wait to share this special thought with you, or whatever, right? And it's a couple videos like that you're using retargeting to get them to show up. And then also other retargeting, just like, you know, all the TV, well, I don't know if they do it here, but in the United States, you know, a lot of TV commercials are commercials for what's going to be on TV later that night. And even on social media, like they advertise like The View or American Idol or whatever, right? So same kind of thing, like you can have a countdown to when it goes live. 20-minute Q&A after it's done. So after the whole thing is done, then opening the lines and answering questions, you just get more sales. It's kind of crazy. Some people go out just doing Q&A because as long as sales are coming, why not? Instead of having people sit in an empty room before you start, tell people to get there early and then loop a commercial, right? Or testimonials or case studies while they're waiting. Like, why not pre-sale, right? Use the bottom third teasers, right? Just like we did with VSLs, increase the speed by 10%, leverage deadlines, announcing the names of buyers. When we've done it live, whenever I've done an automated webinar, I always first did it live. And we sometimes did that when we were doing the Q&A. If we had a special bonus, we would start reading off the names of the buyers. You're in, you got the package, and that also got more people to buy. And this is probably, as it comes to webinars, this is probably the most beneficial thing I can add. There are a lot of tactics that I have to share with you, but this one is making more money than anything else. Multiply sales by viewing the webinar, not it, but the webinar, as a message delivery system, because that's all it really is. And I'll explain what I mean by that in a second. Okay, so we'll get back to that in a minute. I just want to go over two dilemmas that you'll experience with webinars, or one dilemma really. So this was one of our original pages, right? When I took the screenshot, I didn't have flash on. But there's so little copy on this page. There's really no copy on this page to speak. What we found is that the more copy on the page, the lower the registration rate. But then the higher the no-show rate, because they really weren't sold on showing up in the first place, right? The more copy on the registration page, the lower the registration rate, the higher the show-up rate. These kinds of issues happen all the time. And so I'm bringing this up as it relates to webinars, but really, just like we were doing earlier, we're breaking up the goal of like making the sale into marketing and selling. We don't have a problem here unless we see there's a problem, because we don't have to sell them on this page. So what we did was we kept this page false. We want every lead that we can get, right? But then we either had a bridge page before they got to the thank you page, where like then we sold them on. We already got they click this, it opens up like their name and email. After they click that, they go to a bridge page that then sells them on all the things they're going to learn, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Or we did it on the thank you page, like something like this, a much longer thank you page where this video was me, like telling them what a great thing they did by registering, and then what I'm going to be teaching them, and here to add it to here's your direct link, you know, a bunch of share it on Facebook, et cetera, like all these different social media things. But the point is that by recognizing that you can take any task online, and if you're running into a challenge, break it up into smaller tasks, oftentimes increases conversion rate, right? Because you're making that next ask a smaller step. So this is probably, I think, the most valuable information I can give you as it relates to webinars. If you look at it like a message delivery system, then you recognize how much opportunity you have. So, okay, we were running this webinar for a while, and it was doing really well, but we came to that issue where show up great. At that time, it wasn't 35%, let's say it was 50% or 60%, but it was, you know, at one point it was 80%. And we couldn't mail for a replay more than 3 times, right? But what I realized was that I don't like webinars, personally, like going to them. Like I register for a lot of them, I show up for very few of them. Because I don't see that much value in webinars. There are some that are valuable, but I haven't. But I do like live presentations. And by live, I don't mean necessarily live like the person speaking on stage at that moment, but anyone I respect or admire, if they're speaking from stage, I'm much more likely to tune into that video than a webinar. So I was giving a presentation at the Early to Rise Bootcamp that was very similar to the webinar because I was speaking about the same thing, my business coaching program. And so we decided to do a test, which is what we normally did whenever we were doing webinars. And we sent this out, just a like plain page, to people that were on the webinar list, and said, you know, this weekend only, you can watch this presentation that Rich gave at the Early to Rise Bootcamp. It would have cost you $2,000 to go, and even then you might not have been able to because it was sold out. But for this weekend, we've got the ability to let you watch it for free. And so they watched it for free, we put the pitch in there, and we sold the crap out of it, right? Like a lot. So then we turned it into part of our overall campaign, right? So after they registered